Good morning, everyone. My name's Craig McQueen. I'm happy to welcome you to our second merger update. I'm especially pleased to welcome once again our field locations: Altoona, Mount Laurel, Albany, Indianapolis, Dearborn, and Pittsburgh. Once again, we'll handle questions from each location. We'll start in reverse order from what we did the last time because we came up a little short with Altoona. So this time we'll start with Altoona. What we'll have this morning is a brief update from Dave Levan, then we'll go to the questions from the SCT audience here in Philadelphia, and then the field. For the audience in Philadelphia, please wait for the microphone to come around to you before you ask the question. I have two people here who will be walking around with microphones. The reason for the meeting at this point in time is simply timely because we approach our December 23rd shareholder meeting, materials for which you've been receiving in the mail, and part of the purpose of this and my role is to help you clarify what you're receiving in the mail. This week you'll be seeing these posters both in Philadelphia and around the divisions. The poster simply explains what's going on with three different color proxy cards you'll be receiving: one white one, one green one, and one gold one from NS. The white card you should have received if you're a Conrail common stockholder. You'll receive the green card if you're an ESOP holder, and you'll receive the gold card from Norfolk Southern. The important thing to know about these colors is, and I'll repeat once again at the end of the session, the important thing to understand is that the white card, the last card that you vote, is the card that counts. The white card is the card you should vote, assuming you're for Conrail CSX. The green card is the ESOP card. You'll also vote for Conrail CSX on that card. Have that opportunity. The gold card is the card you'll receive from NS. The important thing to understand about the gold card is that if you vote that card, even if you believe you're voting against NS on that card, you negate what you do on the white card. The best thing to do with the gold card, assuming that you're for Conrail CSX, is to do nothing with it, or as the poster illustrates, toss it in the basket. So again, I'll repeat that at the end of the show once again, but the important thing to know is that for Conrail CSX, the best place to vote that is the white card and the green card. Now I'd like to ask Dave Levan to come down for a brief update on the merger, and then, as I said, we'll go to questions and answers. Thanks.
I'm going to use the podium this morning because I've got some notes, but then when it comes time for Q&A, I'll come out here where I can be a little bit more available in the front of you. And if you don't understand all that about the gold card, my son heard December 23rd and he heard gold card and he thought he was getting an unlimited use of a MasterCard for Christmas. That's not what we mean by the gold card. Thought what I would do this morning before we do turn it over to Q&A is just talk a little bit about the changes since the last meeting. Talk about, again, so that there really is no misunderstanding about the ultimate mission here in terms of achieving a friendly merger with the CSX. Talk about the number of fronts, kind of using battle terminology here because it does seem very similar to a war that we're involved in here, so I'll talk about the fronts that we're taking on in this process. Talk about our ally, CSX, talk about other allies or potential opponents to where we want to end up in the ultimate mission, and then make some closing remarks about the role of the SCT in this whole process. It certainly seems like it's a lot longer than less than 2 months ago since I last came before this group to talk about the positive step that this company and the CSX have embarked on. A lot of things have happened. I'm sure you're well aware of all of them, and I apologize for taking some time here to just review through them, but it may help to do that. Obviously, last time we stood here, we were on a path to move forward proactively to achieve the best result for Conrail and all of its constituencies, and I think that's an important point, and I will talk a little bit more about why that's important in this whole process. Obviously, since that time, we've had an NS bid. We've had a restructuring of the cash portion of the CSX merger consideration, a subsequent increase in the NS bid to $110 all cash. We were sued by the NS and other shareholders. We've been to court. We've had a positive decision from the U.S. court in terms of the injunction that was requested to preclude the first of the CSX tender offers. Obviously, that was appealed, and quickly we were successful in upholding that decision under appeal. Since that time, on the litigation front, we had last week jointly with the CSX filed a counterclaim against the NS, and I think all the information about that is available too. I see my lawyers out there. Maybe I'm not properly framing all the appropriate. Coming close, he says. Obviously, since the last time I was here, we've had the first CSX tender offer that was successfully completed. We have now set the shareholders meeting for December the 23rd, and the second CSX tender offer has commenced, subject to obviously the vote of the Conrail shareholders in the meeting on the 23rd. One other thing that we talked briefly about in the last meeting was the importance that the new company have a new name that really represents what it is, that the vision that we have for this new enterprise, and I'm happy to say that we have started the process. We have engaged a firm to help us with that, to start the process of developing the new name for this enterprise, and I think hopefully, Arnie, we're on a plan to finish that sometime early in next year. The punchline, I guess, if you take all of that together from a communication standpoint during this intervening period since the last meeting, has unfortunately meant that we have been in a position of communicating from a defensive position rather than from an offensive position. I know that has been frustrating to me. It's been frustrating to many of you, and there are reasons for that. In light of the NS's original offer and their increased offer, there were certain periods in there where by law we were precluded from going out and really talking proactively about the benefits of the Conrail CSX merger. And as a result, as I said, we found ourselves in this period all too often from a communication standpoint being on defense or being reactive rather than being out there and being proactive. And I think we're at a point now where we have the opportunity to reverse that and get out and really take control of the communication and sell the benefits of the merger that we have embarked on. Talk about the ultimate mission just a little bit. Certainly when you get into that question, the first question that we talked about before is why the decision to merge in the first place? And I think obviously to be, again, redundant and reinforcing the direction that the rail industry, through consolidation, was taking, as well as, and more importantly, the demands of our customers and the demands of the marketplace really left us in a position to be able to achieve our long-term visions for growth. Really was what the primary driving factor of the decision to merge. Let me just put a little bit of that in perspective in terms of the growth challenge that we have faced here at Conrail. And I don't mean to pick on the core service group, but core service group in terms of revenue represents about 45% of the company's revenue. In the last 4 years, in round numbers, 93 to 94, the core revenue grew by about $60 million year over year. 95 over 94 was down some $30 million. We expect 95 to 96 core revenue to be down something approximately in the $10 million range. And as we look at the plan preliminarily for 1997, we really don't see a scenario for the core part of our business significantly different than what we have seen in 1996. and you can talk about excuses for that in terms of weather and service, but I think we would all acknowledge that to support our long-term viability for this company and for all of its constituencies, the significant role that growth plays in that prospect. And growth is not just going to come from improved service, although that's clearly a part of it. It's going to come from an increased product, which brings in all the other components of what we deliver of value to our customers. And of course, the other piece of that is the bigger network, and that's clearly what the CSX-Conrail merger provides. First and foremost to us is the opportunity to go more places, to have access to more customers, to go better places, a better mix between where our network goes and where their network goes, a better positioning of ourselves for the future of the industry, as well as what it means in terms of being able to provide to our customers in the marketplace a much broader product other than just rail transportation in terms of logistics and exposure to the other modes of transportation that are currently in the CSX portfolio. I want to talk also about this concept or issue about what is right for the company and the concept that is embodied in Pennsylvania law, which allows the company and its board and its management to consider the company's interests, both from a time perspective in terms of what's in its best interest for the short term, but also what's in the best interest in the long term. So there's certainly a timing factor that is embodied in Pennsylvania law. And embodied in Pennsylvania law is also the concept that a company has value and is important to other than just its shareholders. And that's not to say our shareholders are not important. They're critically important, and we acknowledge their importance. But it also allows us to take a look at our customers, our markets, our employees, communities, in deciding what the right thing is for the company. And I think it should be very clear that when we decided to merge, number one, and number two, when we decided that CSX was the right merger partner, that it was never our intent to auction the company. And in fact, there's no obligation for us to have auctioned the company, and so we want to be very clear that it was never our intent to auction the company, and certainly that's not, and still not our intent. From the standpoint of our ally, the CSX, I think we have to understand that there's a lot going on here from a tactical standpoint. I would say that we have organized ourselves in a way that separates those folks who are working the various requirements of this merger process and aligning our folks up with their counterparts on the CSX from a tactical standpoint. I think for the most part the relationships are working very well, and I think for the most part we are sharing a common view of the tactics that we are embarked on to make certain that we are moving forward in the way that we want to move forward. I think it's also clear, though, that we must understand that in spite of the fact that we are working on this part of our business together, we are still competitors, and we need to continue to be competitors in those markets, and I think we must keep very clear in front of us that while we're very much on the same page as it relates to this merger transaction, our interests are not aligned as it relates to the marketplace at the moment, because we are competitors and we need to continue to be aggressive competitors. And the other place where our interests are not necessarily perfectly aligned as it relates to shareholders, and clearly our job is to make certain that Conrail shareholders' interests are protected, and the CSX's role is to make certain that their shareholders are clearly considered and protected in this, and those two things are not necessarily and not always in perfect alignment, and that's one other area where we continue to make sure that we keep ourselves diligent in making sure that we're both doing right by our various constituencies. In terms of other allies or other potential opponents out there, obviously we've got customers have a lot of interest in this merger. We've got state and local governments, particularly the states of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Ohio. We've got short lines, ports, employees, and labor, and I separate employees separately from labor because I think there are certain places where our employees' interests are in alignment with those who represent certain of our employees, but I think we clearly need to make sure that we understand the need to communicate with all of them in terms of what the value of this transaction is. Finally, before I open up to Q&A, let me talk then just a little bit about your role. But before I do that, let me say very clearly and very straight, I'm every bit as committed to this transaction as I stand here today than I was when I stood before you on October the 17th or 18th, whenever it was. I may have some battle scars. I may, from time to time, as you see me in the hallways, look a little battle weary. And that's probably because from time to time during this period of time, I have had some battle scars and I have had battle weariness. But I wake up each morning with a renewed energy and a renewed enthusiasm to see this transaction through to its conclusion. Which really brings me to your role. You are the strategy communication team. This is one vehicle to keep you informed. I am only one person, and there's lots of audiences that would like my time as the communicator to what the implications of this transaction are. I can't do it all by myself, and that's really the role that you must play to get out and be proactive in your communication about the importance of this transaction and to listen to those various constituencies as to what their concerns are, because clearly this communication is a two-way street. We need to be able to explain why we think this is the best transaction for this company. At the same time, we need to be receptive and responsive to their concerns. So what's really up to you is you have to understand where we are, and to the extent that you don't fully understand, that's why we have forums such as this. That's why we have a hotline to allow people to call in, to keep the flow of information. So first of all, you need to understand. You need to then communicate. You need to go out and seek support from those other potential allies and do what we need to do to make certain that we give every opportunity to have them be allies as opposed to opponents. And finally, of course, in light of the vote that is going to be taking place, as Craig talked about, clearly the one group that we need their support most immediately in is support from the ESOP participants in terms of taking this next step to get approval to move this forward. The one last thing I would say that I need from all of you and the company needs from all of you is, as I said in the last session, deliver the best possible results we can deliver for 1996. And when I say deliver the best possible results, that's not just financial results, that's deliver the best possible results to our customers and to all of our constituencies for 96, but also obviously as we go into 1997. We can't lose sight of the fact that this transaction at the end of the day is only as good as we make it during this intervening period. So we must all work hard every day to continue to keep positive results in this intervening period. With that, I will step out here and open it up for Q&A. Where's the first question coming from? Altoona.
Hey, Chuck Menovich here.
Yeah, Chuck.
I guess everybody's concerned about what do you think the odds are of this merger actually happening and some kind of time frame?
Well, this from a standpoint of odds of it happening, I think the odds of it happening are very, very good as long as we continue to do all the things we need to do in terms of making sure that everybody understands the value of putting these two companies together. And that certainly the first group that needs to most be convinced of that is the shareholders, because they're going to have the first opportunity to have a say of whether this second tender offer moves forward or not. And so certainly in terms of the importance of the shareholder over the next several weeks as we move into that, I would say that if we get beyond this shareholders meeting with a positive vote, which would allow the CSX tender offer to move forward, on the basis of that being concluded, then I would tell you my odds of seeing this merger completed would increase pretty significantly. So we're in a period of time here where the odds are going to be subject to our success in convincing the shareholders that this is the right combination. As to timing, Again, I think that's to some extent dependent upon the shareholders meeting. It's scheduled for the 23rd. I think we are certainly intent on working hard to achieve a positive vote. It should have been clear in all the materials that if we get a sense that that will not have a positive outcome, we certainly have the alternative to continue to delay that meeting. But the push right now has got to be to see our way through to a positive result on the 23rd of December, and with a positive result on the 23rd of December, then I'd say we are very well on our way to seeing this merger to completion from the financial perspective. But then we've got a regulatory process to go through, and there the importance of the customers, the ports, the state and local governments, and all the other constituencies out there, which I'm encouraging all of you to understand the role that you play and where you go to do that. Clearly, to see a successful completion from a regulatory standpoint is going to require a lot more work. So, I mean, we knew when we got into this was going to be a long process with a lot of steps. We knew that we needed to get through it financially. We maybe didn't anticipate we were going to have a litigation step to go through, but clearly that step is being dealt with. But I think from a timing standpoint, we've got to get focused on this 23rd meeting, do everything we can to convince our shareholders that this is in their best interest, get them to deliver a positive vote, and then move forward with the second tender offer, and then go into the regulatory process. Because from there, I think we've got a very good story to tell. Next question's coming from Philadelphia Division. Mount Laurel, I'm sorry.
Did you hear me, Mr. Levan?
No, I can't hear you.
Okay. It's been rumored that the CSX pension fund is presently underfunded. Given ours is presently overfunded, how will the merger affect the pension fund for both companies' employees in the future?
It is not a rumor that the CSX pension fund is underfunded. It is a fact that the present value of all their future benefits exceeds their assets. Somebody give me the number. Bruce, do you know the number, or Tim O'Toole? About $300 million. And the Conrail, on the same equivalent apples-to-apples basis, our pension fund is overfunded by 4. So if you purely just merge those two together and assume the liabilities and the assets, the combined pension fund would still be overfunded by some $100 million. Was there another part to that question, or no?
No, the second part to the question was, how will the merger affect the pension fund for both companies' employees in the future? And I believe you answered that at the end.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, Albany Division?
Yes. Do you expect the Surface Transportation Board to handle the merger consistently with the way they handled the UP Santa Fe merger?
I might have to get my lawyers down here to answer this question. Everybody heard the question. I assume everybody hears these questions full range. Do we expect the Surface Transportation Board to handle it in the same way? I think for the most part they're going to be guided by the same principles. And what previous mergers have done is to provide some clarification of what those principles are. And I think with the clarification of those principles, particularly what we saw coming out of the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific has given us the guidance of how we're going to work through that regulatory process. But I think you'd have to understand it's not a menu of black or white. It's going to be a bit of an iterative process that we're going to have to work and make certain that all the constituencies' competitive concerns are dealt with. And that includes the short lines and, of course, the customers and others who will have a say in that process. And that's why this communication is so critically important now and stays important and maybe becomes even more important as we go through that regulatory process. But we are confident that that we will be able to work our way through that process in a way that will achieve an approval of the merger at the end of the day. Next question coming from Indianapolis. I probably should ask all my merger advisors and helpers to come down here and bail me out when I get out of bounds.
Good morning from Indianapolis.
Good morning.
Charlie Gavan. Question here is, what will happen to the ESOP unallocated stock, and how will it be distributed?
Charlie, would you repeat the question for me, please? I got the part about how the unallocated would be distributed. What was the first part of that?
Yes, sir. What will happen to the ESOP unallocated stock, and how will it be distributed?
Pretty straight answer to that is that decision has not yet been made. I think we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. Clearly, the point of the question is well founded. I don't know what's the percentage, Tim O'Toole. Can you tell me as to between allocated and unallocated?
2 million is allocated, 7 million are unallocated.
So shares, in terms of shares, we've got about 2 million shares that have been allocated to participants, and about 7 million shares that have been unallocated. So it's an important issue because you can tell by the number of shares involved, it has some potential significant consequence. But the actual decision about how they would be allocated and what would ultimately happen in the distribution has not yet been made. And when it is, we will.
Or if there'll be one.
Excuse me?
Or if there'll even be one.
Or if there'll even be a distribution, right? Dearborn.
Dearborn, how sure are we that we can win the countersuit against NS for this frivolous activity?
Well, I guess we don't see it as frivolous, or we would not have filed it. For those of us who had the good fortune or misfortune, and I would, as a sidelight, I will tell you, one of the most painful things I've ever had to go through in my professional career was the 2 days I spent in federal court, and I don't care if I ever have to do that again. So, but that aside, with that having been said, we would not have filed this suit against them if we believed it was frivolous. And for those of us who sat in that courtroom and listened to the opinion of the judge in that case, I think believe that we have a good basis to continue to move that case forward and move it aggressively, and that is our plan. And we didn't file it frivolously. We filed it because we think, in fact, they have behaved in a way that supports the case we have against them. Anything more, Bruce, you would like to? Okay. Pittsburgh.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Levan. This is Mike Peterson. One of the questions we have here is, do the Conrail employees as a group have enough shares or enough votes to make a difference in the December 23rd shareholders meeting?
We don't know specifically how many shares are in the hands of Conrail employees. In terms of actual in their hands, many of those shares are probably registered in what they call street name, and so there's no real good way to track exactly how many shares they are. Shares we can track are the shares that are in the ESOP and in the SEC, which will be voted on the 23rd. Those 9 million shares in the ESOP would represent about 10%. When you said 2 and 7, total of 9, that'd be about 10%. Again, the unallocated, as we've told you, will be voted in the same way that those who choose in the allocated shares vote. They'll vote the same way. That's why the vote of the ESOP is important. A 10% block of shares in those hands is extremely important to us. The only other shares we know about are those which are disclosed in a proxy statement, which are in the hands of officers and directors, which is less than 1% of the stock outstanding. Got a question? Okay, we'll take a question from inside this room. Yeah, very quiet bunch. Sure, Bill.
Have you seen any change in the position of the UP and the BN Santa Fe? The question is, have you seen any change in the position of the UP or the BN Santa Fe on this transaction?
We have not seen any change in position from the UP. That their initial position was to sit on the sidelines and stay out, and we haven't seen anything to the contrary. And the initial reaction and conversations that John Snow and I both had with Rob Krebs would have led us to believe, I think, a similar position. You have now seen, I think, in the press a change in his position that he has an interest in making sure that there is some kind of equality in the two eastern rail networks when this is over, and that he will sit on the sidelines, I guess is the way I would categorize that, as long as he's satisfied that somehow this quote-unquote equality is achieved. One, I don't believe in the necessity of the principle of equality, and I'm not sure that I understand what he means by equality, but I think we may see some change of position from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, given what Rob has said recently.
The two major blocks of shares, FMR and I think Capital Group was the other one. Are we negotiating with them, and what's their general feeling of which way they're going to vote?
I'll probably maybe ask Tim O'Toole to fill in the details on this. The process, we have been out talking to and listening to our shareholders, and we have been keeping a very close profile of who that shareholder base is. As you know, last Thursday was the record date, and so those are the folks who are going to have the opportunity to vote their shares. I don't know, Tim, yet whether we've gotten the profile. Probably too early to get an exact profile or even an estimate of what that December 5th profile, or do you have a look at the?
Well, the Cap Guardian and Fidelity remain our two largest shareholders. We have talked with both of them, but you have to understand that these large institutions also own CSX shares, they own Norfolk Southern shares, and so for them it's kind of a three-dimensional decision. They don't commit themselves, they just ask for information, and they pretty much kept their own counsel so far because they're waiting for the best deal. And so we just keep in contact with them, keep supplying them with information, and I think they're waiting till they get much closer to the December 23rd date before they'll make their positions known.
Yeah, I guess I'll take the opportunity. This is a dynamic process, and so dynamic that the NS put out a press release yesterday, which I first saw this morning, which we really haven't had a chance to really digest, I'm sure what it means or what its implications are, but that's one piece of information. If we haven't gotten out to everybody, we ought to get it out just in terms of what they've said, but the essence of what they've said is that they're really not in a position to want to deal with either the CSX or Conrail unless there's a commitment that the transaction would be $110 all cash and in a trust. And so we will obviously now have to take a look at what that means. And while we're taking a look at what that means, obviously the other very important folks here who are going to be looking to see what that implies are going to be Conrail shareholders, and that'll be just another piece of information that's out there that may influence Conrail shareholders and how they may vote on the 23rd. So it's a very dynamic situation.
I think it might be helpful, Craig or Mr. Levan, if you could summarize exactly what is the deadline for filing the vote here and for voting our shares. And also, we've received so many different pieces of paper that it might be good to summarize exactly what pieces of paper.
Okay, well, as to the timing and as to the pieces of paper other than the gold card my son's going to get, and oh, by the way, Joe, you can still call me Dave. That's, I wouldn't take that as a case of disrespect from any of you. So please feel free and comfortable in calling me by my first name. But Craig, you want to talk about the pieces of paper again in terms of the white card, green card, and the timing? Obviously, from the standpoint of voting, the sooner the better. But your question was when the deadline is. So I think the deadline is for the shareholders meeting to vote 23rd, but to vote effectively by proxy and have that get in. I don't know what we think the actual timing ought to be to make certain that. Craig?
I'm not sure about is there a separate deadline for Fidelity? Cheryl Cook's not here, I believe. Do you know what that is?
I think it's the 19th.
There is a different deadline for Fidelity, which is somewhat earlier. You should read your materials. We think it's the 19th. Bim?
So, yeah. Craig, the proxy tabulator will be tabulating votes right up to the time of the meeting. I mean, they will be faxing material back and forth between the office in Pittsburgh and also the Academy of Music. So obviously it's best to get the proxy cards in as soon as you possibly can.
It's best to vote early.
And often, that's right.
Often doesn't hurt as long as you keep the gold card where it belongs here. Again, as I said earlier, the last card you vote is the one that will count. But you should be conscious as you read your material that someone said that the Fidelity deadline is earlier than the 23rd, so you will have to have that card in. Perhaps it's the 19th, somebody suggested. Once again, though, if you own Conrail common stock, you should have received a white card. You may receive more than one of these cards. The Fidelity card is the green one. That represents the ESOP. The ESOP vote is extremely important because the way you vote your allocated shares will be voted, the unallocated shares, the 7 million, will be voted in proportion to the way ESOP holders vote their allocated shares. So that's a very powerful vote. And once again, the important thing to understand about the gold card is if you're for this transaction between Conrail and CSX, that anything you do with that card will negate anything you do on the white card. If you're for this transaction, it's obviously best to do nothing with that card. That's always easy to do. Just ignore it. Yes?
Craig, you might anticipate a point of clarification for people. In the first wave of this, the first tender, CSX made a move after its first tender, but didn't send out a second wave of papers until quite late. You might talk about, in terms of voting early and voting often, that if there's a later move, your first vote will automatically count for the second tender. I mean, if there's another move by CSX. If I've got that right. I wouldn't want people to sit, because there's been speculation in the press that CSX might make another move. Some people might not be sending in their tender materials. I think it's clear that if you want to vote for CSX, you should vote now, and if there's a move, that will count. It'll pick that up.
Well, I think if there's a clarification here, I think we got to make sure that we don't confuse that what we're asking for is a proxy vote on this opt-out provision, and that then whether you elect to tender or not to tender into the second CSX tender offers, we're going to require a separate action to be taken. These are two separate events. The one we've been talking about this morning is the importance of, first and foremost, getting the right answer at the Conrail shareholders meeting. So we've been talking about the proxy material to vote for the meeting on the 23rd. Now you've got a CSX second tender out there saying, listen, if you want to tender into CSX, who subject to the right vote here on the shareholders, are going to tender to get another 20.1% of Conrail's shares at $110. That would be potentially subject to a further change of the merger consideration by the CSX, and I think that's a separate issue. And maybe Bruce, you want to say some more in clarifying as to between what happens in the tender situation as opposed to what's happening here with the shareholders vote. I want to make sure there's no confusion as to between these two separate issues.
Yeah, there was a question here as to what we can expect to get in the mail. The proxy materials for the shareholders meeting that contain these white cards will be coming from Conrail. The proxy materials that you get in connection with the ESOP that contain the green card will be coming with Fidelity and will include Conrail material and a cover letter from Fidelity that says we've been asked by Conrail to send these to you. The second tender offer, by which CSX would propose to acquire a second 20% of Conrail stock, will be coming from CSX, and we'll have a piece of material from Conrail in it, which says yes, we endorse this tender offer. That closes now on the 6th of January. So in your mail very shortly, if you haven't already got it, you'll be getting the material for the shareholders meeting on the 23rd of December and the material for the second CSX tender offer. So there's two different sets of materials here. The white card and the green card are in connection with the shareholders meeting. The second tender will have another one of those long forms which you have to stretch out on your dining room table to fill out like the first tender material that you received.
Okay, we're going to go back to Altoona.
We talked about litigation and our lawsuit against the Norfolk Southern.
Yes.
I was elated to hear that we're being proactive and we're going after him, but what do we plan on gaining out of this? Out of the lawsuit I'm talking about?
Well, ultimately what we have asked for in this litigation is monetary damages. In that what we are asserting in our lawsuit is that they have interfered with a merger agreement between Conrail and CSX, and as a result they have caused us damages, and we are asking to be compensated for those damages, and we're also asking for punitive damages because we believe they did this in a way that would warrant an award of punitive damages. I guess, Bruce, that's what we're asking for. That's what we've asked for in our litigation. The other thing, I guess, that you hope to achieve with that is a signal to all of the parties that we are proactive and that we're just not going to sit here and let this merger be interfered with. And to the extent that that gets that message out and causes some folks to consider their past or future behavior as it relates to interfering with this transaction, then that's the other thing you do with litigation, is to send a message. So we're both sending a message with that litigation, but we clearly are filing and seeking monetary compensation for the money that we believe has been spent in dealing with that interference. Bruce, anything else you'd like to add to? Okay, going to Mount Laurel.
What has the customer feedback been like since the original merger announcement?
The question is, you've heard the question, I don't have to repeat it. Customer feedback, I can only speak, I guess, firsthand to customers that I have personally spoken with, and I would say that generally that feedback has gone from neutral to sitting on the sidelines, doing an evaluation, waiting to see what it means to my company, personally, to being positive. I have not come across in any of my conversation customers who have come out with an immediate opposing view. I'm sure there are some out there. John Salmon has been to see the the CMA, so maybe I'd ask John to talk a little bit about your sessions with the CMA and any customers you may have spoken with. I'll probably then ask Cynthia to talk about some of the sessions she's had with some of her customers. John, let's go first to you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that as Dave said, this is a process and people are collecting information, and what we have seen is the more information you give people in terms of how you're going to file a case and what you're going to do with the competitive situations, the more positive they become. So I think this really right now is there's a lack of information. As Dave said, we've been held back. Norfolk Southern has been on the street, so as we're able to get out, talk to people, tell them how we're going to proceed and what we're going to file, you get, I think, the ability to support and gather support is really growing. So it's really a matter of everybody getting out, and as Dave said, you can't do it with 2 or 3 people. It's going to take all of us to get out, tell the whole story, because there are a lot of really good benefits here for this merger, and we just need to tell the story. And the more the story is told, the more positive reaction you're going to get.
While John's passing that on to Cynthia, because I'll ask her to talk about what contacts she's had, I think John's really hit it. I think, this is one of the reasons why we've got to be proactive here. Customers, ports, all those who have an interest in the marketplace are an important constituency that we not only have to get our story out to, but listen to their concerns so that we can have this be an iterative process to, as we listen to their concerns and then deal with the STB regulatory process, adjust in any way we see important to make sure that we are listening to the concerns and dealing with them in the most effective way to be sure that we get the right result at the end of the day from a regulatory standpoint.
In intermodal, we've had the same kind of reaction that starts neutral and tends to turn more positive with more information. And the only negative that I have heard consistently has nothing to do with this merger. It has to do with every merger, because every customer at this point of any size has gone through the Santa Fe BNSF merger and the UP-SP merger. And if there's anything they've asked us is to please try to learn from those and figure out how to stay focused while we're doing this. So we've actually been asking each of our big customers what they noticed in every other merger and what they think could have been done better to keep life easier for them, because they're a little merger weary. So the substance of our merger, I think, is neutral to turning positive with information, and I think we could make it very positive by having them feel that we are really running this railroad on their behalf in the meantime. So.
Okay. Maybe I'd ask you to take a mic back to Bud Turner, and he can talk about what, if anything, he's heard from his automotive customers. And while you're doing that, I will also reinforce Cynthia's point, which was part of the point I wanted to make at the very end about what all of you can do. And that is, we cannot lose focus on what we do day in, day out to deliver results. And when I say results, as I said, I don't just mean financial results, because our customers have sent a message loud and clear. They are merger weary, and we don't want to be in the same category. In fact, if anything else, we want to have higher levels of service to our customers during this period to prove to them that somebody can do it differently, and we're going to be the ones who are going to do it that way. We're going to provide better service at a time when we know that at the end of the day, putting these two companies together is going to be the right thing to do, and there's no better demonstration of that than delivering them good, solid service in the meantime.
I would echo Cynthia and John's comments, and I guess the one observation is there's been no negatives out there at this point, and they've been neutral to the positive side. You and I, Dave, have met with some of the top names in the automotive industry, and we have those who have indicated that they are supportive, and when we're ready, we just need to call on them. But tomorrow also is a key day in that the communications plan has been put together and will be kicked off tomorrow afternoon. Again, as John mentioned, to expand the base of those, and also, more importantly, to provide you with more information required for the meetings going forward.
Okay. Tim Dwyer is not here, although I would say that if there are any places where there are probably more serious reservations than in any other market out there, it is in the coal and electric utility area. That, I guess, foundation of some concern about what mergers mean has been the kind of the cornerstone of an initiative out there to try and deal with the possibility of competition in the rail industry, and that's not opposition to our merger as much as Cynthia said. It's really about what is going on in the rail industry overall, and I think that's an area where we also need to be very diligent about the prospects of any kind of access legislation or any kind of re-regulation that would put some onerous conditions on the entire industry. That's an area where I think we need to continue to not only get our message out about the positives of our combination, but all the positives that rail transportation has provided into the marketplace as a means to make sure that we don't in any way encourage re-regulation of this industry. I've just gotten the 5-minute sign, and does that mean I'm going to Albany? Okay, that means I'm going to Albany.
To what extent will Conrail union leaders be kept advised of the ongoings?
Your question kind of broke up, but I gather it had to do with the union leadership during this process? Yes, sir. Okay. You want to hand the mic to Dennis Aroka? There's been at least one preliminary meeting with rail labor. I'll let Dennis talk about those contacts.
We're in regular contact with them, both with written materials similar to those that John, Cynthia, and George have been using with customers, and telephonic contact as well. We started at 7 a.m. on October 15th when the merger was announced. In addition, we've made a presentation with my counterpart from CSX to the AFL-CIO Transportation Trades Division meeting. They've organized a coalition to receive information and try to develop a unified rail labor position. And so that dialogue is continuing as well.
Okay, I think unfortunately as I said earlier, in all of this communication, unfortunately right now, the communication is around the issue of why Conrail CSX as opposed to Conrail NS. And whether that's from labor, whether that's with the customers, or whether that's community, states, or whatever, that's the issue right now that is the focal point. The better focal point, in my opinion, is once we get past this shareholders meeting and get through this second CSX tender offer, is really getting out and communicating what we really want to talk about, and that is why is the Conrail CSX merger absolutely the right thing for all of our constituencies, and get it off this Conrail CSX, Conrail NS argument. To me, that's the wrong argument, but it's a necessary argument given the position we find ourselves in. Any more questions from Indianapolis?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Has there been any thought given relative to non-agreement benefit packages such as continuation of the 401k plan, et cetera?
I assume your question has to do with continuation post-merger?
Yes.
We haven't had any discussions at all about what any of the employee benefit programs might look like post-merger. Obviously, we will continue the 401k program for Conrail for this continuing period of time while we're an independent company. And of course, upon approval of the merger, we will obviously be doing a lot of merging of all of our operations, including our benefit programs, but we haven't had any conversation about what that might entail yet. Want to go to Dearborn for one last question at Dearborn?
Dearborn, ultimately, whose responsibility it is to determine the concessionary issues we're going to have to give to not just NS, but all the various constituencies that are going to get involved in this?
It's a good question. It's by the terms of the merger agreement, it's a joint between us and the CSX. We've had teams together. In fact, one of the reasons why Les Passa isn't here today is that he has been leading that initiative on behalf of Conrail, and we have started to go through the process of determining what that concession package ought to look like, and who might be interested in stepping forward to provide the necessary service to satisfy those competitive issues. And one of the things I think that's been left out there as impression is that the NS is the only game in town as the only alternative to provide competition, and that, in my opinion, is just not true. There are others out there who are very capable of providing that competition where it's required, and they are very interested in providing that competition, at least from our early discussions with them. So that's a process that is ongoing. It has started now pretty aggressively, and it's one that we are working jointly on with the CSX hand in glove. Pittsburgh?
The first tender offer being closed and apparently accepted 23% of the stock offered, the unallocated ESOP shares, apparently 23% of those were also acquired. Does that income, since those shares were owned by the company, affect our income in this year?
I'm going to ask Tim O'Toole. He's shaking his head. No, it doesn't impact the income, although I think there might be a point of clarification here. The ESOP shares that were accepted in the tender were the 23% of those tendered. I'm not sure what the percentage of the allocated ESOP shares were tendered. Do we know how many?
The trustee tendered them all.
Okay.
Because it was apparent to the trustee that this was in the best interest of the beneficiaries. But the consideration for those shares went into the trust. That is not stock or now proceeds owned by the company. And it will be held in the trust for the beneficiaries of the plan, the non-agreement employees.
Okay. Any other questions from inside here? I guess let me make one last quick run through the field then, because this is an opportunity where, as I say, at the end of the day, if I expect you to carry your share of the load from a communication standpoint, because I can't be the company's only communicator, you have to understand what we're doing so that you can communicate it. Hopefully, if you understand it, you agree with it, and you can go out there with the intensity of your belief that the Conrail-CSX merger is the right answer, and listen to those constituencies. And the only way I think, obviously, you can do that is if you feel comfortable that you've got as much information as you possibly can to do that. So I'll make one last round through the field. I've got one question here I'll take, and then we'll make one last run through the field to make sure that everybody has the best possible understanding you can have, that you believe as intently as I do that this is absolutely the right thing to do, and that you can communicate that intensity on your own personal part, if in fact you believe it. First and foremost, you have to believe it as deeply as I do, that this is the right answer. And if you do believe it as deeply as I do that this is the right answer, then you must get out there and communicate the deep conviction of your feelings about the Conrail-CSX merger. Let me take the question here.
Yeah, Dave, I think you might have addressed this in the context of other questions, but when will we and when will the employees get more of a sense of how the new organization will be structured, assuming everything goes forward on the 23rd and we start moving forward for the filing with the STB? And then I guess specifically, when will decisions be made as to the location of the railroad operating headquarters?
Okay. Well, first piece of information that everybody will get will be the operating plan when we file it with the Surface Transportation Board, which we currently timetable would be, Bruce, we believe, March the 1st. So on March the 1st, we will file our application with the Surface Transportation Board. Again, that's all on the presumption that we get through this first step here, or this next step, if you will, because we've already been through a couple of steps, but get through this shareholder vote step, the second tender offer, we will go ahead and file our merger application then with the Surface Transportation Board about March the 1st. At that point, you will see a detailed operating plan. We will all see that detailed operating plan, and we can get out and start to communicate the implications of that part of the operating plan. As it relates to then decisions about how do you organize yourself from a management structure standpoint, and the issues about what locations would we expect to continue to basically continue to move on their own current basis, including the operating headquarters. Those decisions are just going to take some normal course of events. Obviously, as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the combined railroad, there's a lot more I need to know about the CSX operation, and so most of those decisions are going to require me to know a lot more than I know today, and they're just going to be a very studied process. I think the question came up the last time when John Snow and I were here about the service group organization, for example. I happen to believe that that structure has worked well for us, not as good as I'd like it to work, and we're going to take a look at some of the things that maybe are not working the way they need to work with our service group organization. But I then have to compare that with all the things that the CSX has done and see. We're going to take the best of both at the end of the day, I guess, is the answer, number one. And number two, because I'm going to be the person who has the responsibility for making those ultimate decisions, I need to do a lot more to understand a lot more about the CSX than I do today. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on me to get out and continue my education process so we make the right decisions at the end of the day. Going to go to Altoona.
Dave, we're all set here for now. We want to thank you. It's been very informative.
Okay, great. You're welcome, Chuck. Okay. Mount Laurel?
Yes, Mr. Levan. What's the latest analyst position on the merger?
You're talking about the financial analysts?
Yeah, initially the temperature seemed to be a little hot up there as our last meeting, and you and Mr. Snow graciously told us about. I'm wondering how that's cooled off, if any, at this point in time.
I guess I would say that it has cooled off, but it's still warm, and it's warm depending upon the assessment about the for or against this upcoming vote. Tim O'Toole has been out, talked an awful lot. Why don't you give Tim the microphone? He could do a better job of explaining firsthand. And it's part of this other issue about communication, getting out and selling the positives of this merger. Again, as I said, unfortunately, we've been in a position where under legal requirements, we couldn't really get out and talk about the benefits of our merger. We've been out reacting to the challenges of the Norfolk Southern. That's been true in this constituency and the financial markets as much as it has been. And I firmly believe that when we have the opportunity, as we do now, to get out and really talk about why this merger is the right one and what its benefits are to the shareholders and all the others, it'll be more well received when people understand it. Tim?
David, I think that's certainly true. A lot of what you heard in that phone call were the kind of the cacophony that comes out of this community called the arbitrageurs, the people who aren't long-term shareholders. They just bought in when the transaction was announced on the hopes that there'd be some kind of auction. And so what you see there is just a lot of churning, a lot of people who want to see the action, hope to make a quick buck. As we've got out and talked to our long-term shareholders and explained to them the thought process we went through to get us here, we've received a lot of support, and they're just waiting to see what the final answer will be. David?
Okay. Go to Albany for one last question, and then I'll apologize for the 3 or so locations we didn't get back around, but I'm getting the timeout signal here. So let's go to Albany for one last question.
No, we have no further questions, Mr. Levan. Thank you very much.
Then we'll go to Indianapolis for one last question.
Took them by surprise. Hey, could you tell me if we're going to...
Uh-oh. All right, we'll go to Dearborn for one last question.
We also would like to thank you for your communication efforts.
Okay. Well, I'm going to thank you in advance for your communication efforts because my work today is certainly not done, but certainly now passes a lot of this responsibility on to all of you. How about Pittsburgh, since Dearborn really didn't have a question? One last one in Pittsburgh, then we will, going all the way around. Anything else in Pittsburgh?
The exchange rate that possibly the CSX would be sweetening the offer and that it would change from 1.85 to something different. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the only thing I can say about that, Mike, is that, and we said this, I guess, just before and just after the decision in the court case, and what we said then continues to be true, and that is that we have been in discussion with the CSX about the merger consideration, and if and when something changes, we will immediately disclose any change, but at this point, since we haven't disclosed anything, means that there's been no change, but there's been ongoing discussions about the consideration as it relates to being able to get a successful vote. So those discussions will be ongoing. Other than that, there's really nothing more to say at this point. Okay? Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot. That concludes our broadcast. If anybody has any doubts about what to do with cards, give us a call on 1-800-CONRAIL. Thank you.